I'm Thomas Stith, the moderator for this very exciting discussion today. First of all, I want to thank Opportunity North Carolina for providing a forum for this discussion. Before we get started, why don't we take a few moments to introduce ourselves, and we'll start off with Laura.
I'm Laura Leatherwood. I'm president at Blue Ridge Community College, but I've been in the North Carolina Community College system about 27 years. A lot of history in a lot of different roles.
I'm Michael Lee. I represent almost all of New Hanover County in District 7 in the North Carolina Senate. I'm also the Education Policy and Appropriations Chair in the Senate.
I'm Catherine Truitt. I'm the State Superintendent for North Carolina Department of Public Instruction.
Larry Shaheen. I'm a trustee at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte, and I'm an attorney here in Charlotte that works inside the education sphere in terms of policy and legislative activity.
Well, obviously, you know, as leaders in your various roles in higher education and policy, our K through 12 system is critical, is foundational. Catherine, why don't you start us off today and talk about, you know, some of the opportunities, challenges, and if you had your wand to wave, the 3 policy issues that our North Carolina General Assembly could address to enhance our K through 12 system.
Yeah, if only I had that wand to wave. I'm sure a lot of us feel that way. Well, there are 3 things that I think about when I consider what we could do in North Carolina to do a better job of preparing students to be successful in the post-secondary plans of their choice, whether it's employed, enlisted, or enrolled. The first thing is that we must do for math what we've done for reading. And let me explain what I mean by that. In April of 2021, North Carolina passed the Excellent Public Schools Act, which really was a statewide policy framework for how we teach reading in North Carolina. This is a national issue, and it is also a North Carolina issue. And that work that we did, which provided legislation to really mandate that we teach reading according to what the science tells us is the correct way to teach reading, is paramount. And we're seeing the fruits of our teachers' labor in our K-3 early literacy test scores. Now we need to do the same thing for math. About on average, 20 to 25% of kids are starting high school proficient in math. That has a massive impact on their trajectory after high school, that low proficiency rate. And so we need a statewide policy framework that does the same thing for math, what it did for reading, that is well funded, that provides professional development for teachers, and also dips into what higher ed is doing to prepare our pre-service teachers to teach math. The second thing that we need to do is to consider how we assess or how we define what a high quality school is and what student success looks like. Right now, our state accountability model does that by using one metric, and that is essentially how kids do on one and done high stakes testing at the end of the year or the semester. And that algorithm of 80% achievement and 20% growth, how far did a teacher grow those students throughout the year, is largely what determines a school performance grade. There are many other things that we should be incorporating into that formula to define what student achievement looks like, what school quality and student success look like, including workforce development, initiatives that are in play in legislation. All students starting this year must have a workforce development plan starting in middle school. Computer science is a graduation requirement now in North Carolina. There are a lot of things that schools need to be doing to ensure that all students are prepared after high school. The third thing that we need to do is to consider how we redesign the teaching profession itself. A lot of people jump right into teacher pay. That might be part of that conversation. But right now we have a system that is not attracting young people into the profession. It doesn't look like other professions. It is a job where we expect first-year teacher to do the same job as a teacher who's been doing it for 10 years. And consequently, we have a rate of about 26% of teachers who leave at the end of the first year of their teaching experience. So I would say that those are big bucket items that if we could get some policy considerations in place with some funding. I don't think that funding is really at the heart of any of those issues, but they are certainly things that sit in legislation that need altering.
Yeah, and structurally, with what we did with reading, and kind of bringing that forward, and from a legislative perspective, we completely agree. We need to be kind of working on some of those things, and Catherine has already kind of put together some things for us to start working on. And so those are kind of critical components, and a lot of times, we're getting our policy, from folks like Catherine and others in the community college system, and actually all throughout our education system in North Carolina, from early childhood all the way up to post-secondary. So.
I think I was going to just, Catherine talked about that workforce and that career plan at the middle school level. What that's going to help the community colleges do is forecast what kinds of career technical opportunities can we bring into our high schools if we know what is the interest level and what do these plans look like. That helps us be able to develop and create programs, and we have the ability to actually get them into our high schools and actually teach at that level. So I think that is a real good foundational piece, and whatever we need to do to kind of stand that up, I think that's really, really important. And then provide that level of education all the way up to as they matriculate into the community college. So that's probably about a 6-year window or a 6-year on-ramp into post-secondary education.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think there's three. It's funny because I'm a CMS grad, so I actually grew up and went to schools, from 6th grade on here in Mecklenburg County. I got an opportunity to experience the busing system for the magnet program here in Mecklenburg County. I actually think that the International Baccalaureate program that Mecklenburg County at that time used was an excellent program, and it was great for academically gifted children. But the problem we've got, and returning to the point about treating kids where they are and really working on the math issue on this and how reading and the science of reading has worked, we've got to acknowledge that kids are different. I mean, when you're looking at the most important three things that people aren't doing, first and foremost is that we're trying to treat all kids the same. We've got a word that people use and like to bandy about called equity. And I think the word, the idea is to create equality. Everyone's given the same opportunities. But the problem with equity is that it doesn't just try and raise the folks who people feel are challenged. It reduces the abilities and opportunities for those who are gifted. And I think that the opportunities that we have for gifted students in the system has to be given, as well as providing for different levels for individuals to learn at different rates. And that same theme of not treating everyone the same has to hold through. One of the things that ultimately is going to be a problem in North Carolina as we move forward is the fact that New Hanover County and Mecklenburg County have very different needs when it comes to education. Burke County has very different needs than Swain County. A lot of these different counties all have very different needs. And trying to treat Mecklenburg County the same as you're treating Cherokee County, it's just not going to work. I mean, when you're dealing with what the problems of those individuals and the cost of living differences in terms of price, if Mecklenburg County provides a supplement to the teachers that were operating here, however, the problem with that is that supplement is paid for by the county level. And if the county really wanted to provide more of a supplement to help to find teachers, they would. Instead, they all cry poor and talk about how the state needs to do more. But the state has a constitutional obligation across the system, and that's statewide. So if the counties really want more for their local education system, they need to step up and fund to the levels at which is necessary, because across the country, North Carolina is the second largest funder of education across the country. It's not a money issue. It's the fact that we have 100 different counties with 115 different LEAs, and all of those LEAs all have different needs and they need to be treated separately. Lastly, and most importantly, which for me is one of those things that it's a story that is not being told and needs to get told. Our urban school systems are failing. And they're not failing because of anything that's happening at the state. They're failing because we have activists in our community who believe that education in urban communities needs to be more about social issues than it is about the basics, and than it is about what we need to be doing. I'll give you a good example. 2012, Mecklenburg County won the Broad Prize. Those who don't know what the Broad Prize is the top school district in the entire country for urbans. Literally was recognized as the top system and had been to that point the shining example of urban school systems, probably for, I think, since the late 80s, early 90s. Done a wonderful job. Now there's schools that struggle to get to 50% proficiency. Now it is not one of the top systems. And in fact, the issues we have is that we cannot continue to condemn urban students to a failing school district that they don't have choices. And we need the local LEAs to embrace the concept of choice and start doing what the actual people that are consuming education want, as opposed to forcing them into a cycle of poverty that's going to be nothing more than implemented by our urban school districts. And it's something that when we talk about school choice and we talk about opportunity starts at the education level and it has to be provided. But if the local LEA is not providing the educational opportunities that need to be there, then the private sector has to step up and do that. Because if we're truly of the belief that children are our future, condemning them to a terrible school district because of the zip code they happen to live in does not work for anybody. And we need the local education establishment and the administrators, of which, by the way, has risen higher than the rate of inflation over the course of the last several years. We got to deal with that. And we got to have them acknowledge that their product is not something people are buying. And until we get them to acknowledge that they are going to compete with private options, they're going to continue to fail the people of our urban communities.
Larry, one thing I'm going to have to ask you is I need you to have more passion and more commitment around education. I know this is a fireside chat, but I want you to bring a little more passion to your comment. One thought I had, and I want to move to one of the special places in my heart, and that's our community college system. But and we saw it a little bit last year, and as I look at the leadership here, I think about the value chain of education is our early childhood education. Any quick thoughts on what we can do as we look at some of the challenges in our early childhood ed? I actually owned and operated a preschool earlier in my career. I said that prepared me for politics. Working with 2 and 3-year-olds works well in legislative bodies. But certainly, first 5 years is when our children learn how to learn. Any thoughts as well as we talk about K-12 and the foundational component of our educational system, what we need to do as we focus on early childhood education?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a policy perspective, we need to be looking at kind of one education system as a whole, because we need to be looking, as you mentioned, those first 5 years, those first 4 years, impact where we are in a post-secondary world.
Certainly.
And so we need to be really thinking about it as one education system as we move forward. The one thing we need to address is really, because our state is so diverse, how do we model a system that will work in a Mecklenburg or New Hanover, but also in a Duplin and a Columbus and in some of the western counties. And so that's been our challenge. And so what we've learned, I guess, over the last year is that we've got to figure that out from a financial perspective. And so what the legislature has done is essentially kind of bridge the gap so we can have a little bit more time and bridge the gap by kind of coming in where federal funding was kind of expiring and supplant that with state funding so we have a time to come up with hopefully a viable solution that works in the early childhood space.
Sure.
I was going to jump in too. I also think that there's a lot of opportunity for more public-private partnerships in this because the businesses stand to gain the greatest amount of people coming into the workforce when they have childcare. They have opportunities for their employees to have childcare. So I think that's a really important piece that we're just starting to get into, and to think about how do we engage the business community in helping us solve that problem.
Yeah, and that's one of the components to this. So part of it is the regulatory framework that overlays
Certainly.
early childhood. Working with the public-private partnerships, creating incentives to where and not just from maybe financial, but a regulatory process by which it makes it easier to accomplish some of the goals in these public-privates.
Sure.
Well, and to Senator Lee's point, if you want to have one large education continuum, you'll have to move early childhood out of the Department of Health and Human Services and back to the Department of Public Instruction.
Correct.
Well, and that's such a great point because the holistic nature of education. I think tell me if I'm wrong on this. I think the number one indicator of a child's success in school is the amount of time that their mother or father sat with them from the ages of 1 to 3 and read with them. Correct.
Well, third grade reading is certainly the number one indicator eventually, but what your point is that would get them to proficiency.
That's
in
right.
third grade.
Well, and it gets them there faster. And to a certain extent, the question in my mind, from a pre-K perspective, is whose responsibility is that? I would actually challenge the business community to say, if you believe that early childhood education is the most important aspect to your success of your employees' children, then I believe that should be a business expense. And I believe that the businesses should pay that and offer that as an actual recruitment tool. I think that if our local businesses were able to do that, it would be something that would be transformational for the entire system. We had this conversation about the funding cliff for pre-K institutions and child care institutions here in North Carolina. I know that the Senate had to deal with that, and they should never have been put in that position. It should have been a business expense from day one. The businesses should have been paying for it. Now, that does not mean that you can't create some form of enticement and endorsement of that policy by finding some form of a tax reduction for the ability for them to take that as a business expense, and then find some way in which to reduce their total, profitability so that it makes sense to them to be able to do that. But looking to the state to provide the total cost for that ultimately is something that I think needs to be challenged from the standpoint of whose responsibility is it? Because we continue to place more and more obligation on the state to educate our children, and I think that we need to start devolving that responsibility before they get into pre-K. And you're talking about pre-K and kindergarten, right before pre-K and right before kindergarten. Yeah, that the state has a constitutional obligation to provide certain things, but preschool and those other opportunities are something that is absolutely different and needs to be the decision of each parent and whether or not the business wants to pay for that for their individuals. You talk about running a preschool. You want to know one of the most difficult properties to get developed and permitted is today? Preschools. Preschools are one of the most difficult properties to develop. They're the most regulated. They're the most difficult. And HHS does not want to do new ones because every time they do a new one, all the folks who exist already have a hard time. So there's a lot there in terms of pre-K, but the state should incentivize putting folks in, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the state should always pick up the tab for that.
Laura, you lead one of our great 58 community colleges here in North Carolina, and our community colleges have been called the best kept secret in North Carolina.
Not anymore.
And I was going to quickly say,
It's not a secret.
now people have finally realized the competitive advantage it gives North Carolina to have a vibrant community college system. What are you seeing from your leadership position on enrollment trends? What students are coming to our community colleges? How can our system work effectively with the legislature to ensure that we are addressing our workforce needs here in North Carolina as we continue to lead nationally, which to me translates into globally economic development across our nation and across our globe?
So if you look over the last year, our community colleges saw an enrollment increase of 4%, which even before the pandemic, we had not seen that. Now coming out of the pandemic, I think you're starting to see obviously a recovery, for lack of a better term, but also that's driven by workforce, that's driven by business, that's driven by jobs. So last year, 4%, but what we're seeing now, which is an interesting dynamic, and we're seeing this, is that more students are coming to us and they're taking part-time. The reason why they're taking part-time is because they're working jobs. Well, this is a good thing. This is a great thing because they're helping in the workforce. But how that hurts the community colleges, our funding formula is based on what's called a full-time equivalent. But we have more students, they're just not taking as many classes. So I think from a policy perspective, I would go to Propel NC, and I just want to shout out to the House and the Senate both. Propel NC was in the budget this year. We didn't quite get there, but I would think, from a legislative perspective, that is something that's going to help us because Propel was really, we aligned it with workforce demands, but also high wage, high demand jobs. What that's going to do is drive colleges to offer more of those particular programs, which fuels the workforce. So I think from a legislative perspective, that's something we're really looking at. We don't see this changing. We see a lot more students showing interest in the trades, construction, HVAC, plumbing, electrical. We've seen huge amounts of students going into those particular programs, but also we're trying to solve the healthcare shortage, nursing, LPNs, medical assistants, nurse aides. So I think we're trying to solve a lot of the problems that we have in the workforce, and I think we're going to have to make sure we continue to support our community colleges to have the capacity to do that.
Sure.
But,
Yeah, and Propel NC is something both the House and the Senate agree on. And so, some of the challenges that we have in North Carolina, especially with regard to workforce, is we have this kind of migration to our urban centers. And so the conventional wisdom has been in the past, we train more people in some of the non-urban areas, and then folks will stay. And we don't really see that kind of bearing out. They may go and then they're going to leave and migrate back with other housing patterns. And so the adult learner is so important because what you can have is if someone's a CNA1 or CNA2 or an LPN that wants to be an RN, You have folks that are already in the community,
Right.
they are already living there, and so if we can find better ways to get them back into the community college system and upskill, they're already rooted in those communities. And so that's one way we need to be thinking about from a policy perspective on how to address some of those issues in our non-urban areas.
So let me just,
Yes, well,
I'm gonna say one
please.
more thing to follow up on that. If there are 3.7 million people who live in our rural areas in North Carolina, I think thinking about those rural, and you actually touched on this. If we don't make sure that we're supporting those rural areas, certainly with access to our community colleges, even this very small community colleges, that's going to be really key because we need everybody participating in the workforce. So I think as you're thinking about policy, we can't leave our rural communities behind in that. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and to your point, if the purpose of K-12 education is to get students ready for life after high school, which needs to include in this economy some type of credential or 2 or 4 year degree, we can't leave our rural districts out of the K-12 equation either, because teacher shortages, teacher vacancies, that is looks different. To Larry's point, teacher shortages look different in Polk County than they do in CMS, which actually had not a lot of
Yeah.
teacher vacancies
No.
right now at the beginning of the school year. It's our rural communities that are, especially in the northeastern part of the state, that are really seeing those shortages most acutely. And so again, we have to start thinking very differently about what teaching and learning independent of time and space look like.
Sure.
Well, and the most important thing from a community college standpoint is that the community college is tied in so well with economic development. We just cannot forget the fact that great partnerships with our business community and our community colleges, that spans the gamut. I think when you look at Olympic High School here in Charlotte, you look at the partnerships that you've had come out of that partnership with a lot of these German companies who are located down in the southwest part of Charlotte, who partner with Olympic to get them from Olympic to community colleges, to Bosch or Siemens or some of those other great companies with the certifications they need to be able to do the work they're doing. That pipeline that you talk about is absolutely vital, and being able to further that. So getting those partnerships and digging into those partnerships and making that a part of economic development grants and working with economic development opportunities. And as we start to see these massive investments into North Carolina for a lot of these high tech, clean energy, opportunities that we have coming out of the Infrastructure and Jobs Act and the CHIPS Act, I think we've got to be thinking about, okay, we're grateful that you want to come here and we're willing to give you a little, enough to come here and make it worth your while.
Right.
But you are going to partner with a community college. Pick one, put the program there, get it set up, and then turn around and have it ready to run. And then, oh, by the way, here's your local school system. You're going to go plug in, have some of your folks get ready to go teach over there, because if you want to have a good workforce, the only way we're going to do that is if we work together on that.
Certainly. Larry, as we talked a little earlier about the education continuum, certainly our university system is the beneficiary of our K-12 and our community college system through articulation agreements and engagement. As you receive the excellent students that come out of these systems, any thoughts on your mind on how there can be enhancement in that continuum when they arrive at your doorstep, if you please? What insight can you provide from your perspective?
Well, I think to a certain extent, we actually in the discussions prior, we were talking about remediation and how folks are having to, the folks coming from our systems are so much better prepared for college than the folks that are coming from somewhere else. And I think that speaks volumes to the progress that a lot of our school systems have made. I can tell you the urban issue that I discussed, we see that coming out of urban systems. You see an urban system, you coming out of an urban system into a university, you're not going to be as ready for that as, say, someone, let's talk about regions, you're talking about coming out of Union County schools, out of Mooresville schools, out of Johnson County schools, out of New Hanover County schools, out of school districts that have stayed focused on the mission in which they exist. Those schools provide a really great product to, in terms of children, to the actual university. Where we've had problems is with the affordability issue. And I think to a certain extent, one of the things that we have been really working on at UNC Charlotte and across the system as a whole, and I really got to give a lot of credit to the Senate specifically, because this was Phil Berger's idea, championed by Senator Lee, what was the North Carolina Promise Program. You know, there's so many universities providing tuition at X amount, being able to come in, guaranteed admission. You're going to be able to have a low-cost education at a system that's going to be a top-level system. We have to continue to encourage that, because I find the competitive advantage that we offer to students coming from a lot of the other areas of the state is the fact that tuition needs to be remaining low. UNC Charlotte at this time, I think, has done, this is the 5th or 6th year in a row where there was no requested tuition increase. And I think it needs to stay that way. And I mean, when you look at our Constitution and the requirement within the Constitution to provide for a community, a university system as free as practicable, I think that when people talk about funding the university system and how we can better serve those who are coming from the primary school system, we've got to continue to keep that eye on affordability. And Chapel Hill State, they've got a lot of wonderful resources and a lot of wonderful opportunities. Where we are seeing the most enrollment growth and where we're seeing the most opportunity for success for our university is at App, UNC Charlotte, UNC Wilmington, and ECU. Those 4 institutions are on the rise. And with the advent of ECU and UNC Charlotte going to R1 Carnegie level research institutions, that's going to create a synergy there. And being able to find those career opportunities at community colleges and at the primary level, plugging them into those career opportunities like at UNC Charlotte, where there's data science, the #1 graduator of data science graduates, and then plugging them into either urban or rural opportunities, that's where I think that there can be so much synergy in saying, you don't have to go to Chapel Hill to get $100,000 a year. In fact, you know, necessarily, depends on whether you're a sociology or political activism major at UNC Chapel Hill, or you're going to be a data scientist at UNC Charlotte. We have to be educating these folks about the choices that they're making and making sure that they're looking at these opportunities with the mind of, when I graduate, what's my employment potential and what's my earning potential?
Sure. Catherine, I know you have some very insightful thoughts around this, so would you like to?
Well, one of the things that I think is really good news for the state is that under my administration, we spent a lot of time looking at what are high value credentials and what are not. And so the way that we track and count credentials has changed a little bit over the last couple of years, to where we are really focused on our schools offering high value credentials in medical sciences, IT, public safety, culinary, and not really focusing on counting things like Microsoft Office. And to that end, last year, North Carolina high schoolers earned a record number of credentials, like the most in state history. And the good news about that is that that will prepare them to go right into a community college. Really, we still have too many kids who cross that graduation stage every year and have no plan.
Right.
Whereas 72% of kids their junior year report intention to attend college, but that not nearly that many actually end up enrolling, and sometimes not even persisting. So we do have some more work to do, but North Carolina is poised to lead the nation in the K-12 community college higher ed workforce development pipeline.
Sure. Senator?
Yeah, and Catherine kind of alluded to, or actually said this. I mean, we've got to find our way, kind of to get away from the Carnegie unit. Time as
Yes.
a proxy for learning,
Yes.
and there are lots of challenges. In the education industry, there are just some structural challenges that we have, whether it's how accreditation is performed for post-secondary and then also K-12. And so there are lots of challenges structurally, the way we are in North Carolina as well, and kind of how we fund, how we administer, how we manage our education system. And so, but I think it all is going to come down to our ability to get away from that time as a proxy for learning, and know that competency-based education is really how we move forward. And it's going to do so many things. Number one, it's going to keep those students engaged, because they're not going to be sitting there learning something that they may have already mastered. It's going to create efficiencies. If the child doesn't have to sit in a class all year, we can redirect that funding in other ways. And so that's really where we need to be headed. That's also going to come through reforming the way we fund traditional public education.
Exactly.
You know, we right now have this allotment system, and we need to move to some kind of weighted student formula. And that's something we've talked about through the years. We've been kind of changing the funding system. You know, in the UNC system, performance funding, we've got Propel that we're going to be moving forward. We really do need to do. We've gone to an arrears model with our K-12. We really need to move to a weighted student formula. All this has to happen kind of in tandem and together and move forward. And sometimes when you try and accomplish a lot at one time, you know, you're taking arrows from all different sides, and so sometimes it's a little challenging.
But then you know you're on the right
That's
track.
That's right.
Laura, any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I was just gonna, I was thinking about a piece of legislation that was probably been the most impactful when I think of matriculation from our K-12 into our community colleges, and that was placing career coaches in our high schools. That has been significant. The only challenge that we have, and I think there's more to do, not every single high school has a career coach. And so that's a local match, and a lot of our small counties just really don't have the money to do that. So I think that's been huge in terms of making that connection with those students and helping them get on the right path, whether it's to a 4-year career technical, 2-year, even into the workforce. That's key. So I think really keep that in mind, Senator Lee, as you move forward.
We've actually been piloting career academies in the Cape Fear area, where we have students coming in the summertime for several weeks and experiencing, you know, different components of what the community colleges offer, and bringing in employers as well. And then what we've done is it's both in Pender and New Hanover County. We put career coaches in the high schools so that once the summer programs are done, they can continue to follow.
That's great.
And right now it looks like we're still waiting on the data, but if the data bears out, it's something we'd like to start rolling out in a much bigger
That'd
way.
be awesome.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Well, and don't forget the Portrait of a Graduate.
Yeah.
So the Portrait of a Graduate was something that we developed, a grassroots effort across the entire state that involved our higher ed partners, the faith-based community, parents, employers, to really come together and say, what are the competencies that students need to have aside from academics to be successful after high school, whether it's employed, enlisted, enrolled. And those 7 competencies became the Portrait of a Graduate, and they are durable skills that that students will need whatever they pursue after high school. And so things like personal responsibility, collaboration, things like learning how to work with others, things that employers are telling us that folks don't often come to them with. Those, you know, that skill set to be an effective employee from day one. That is now being infused in kindergarten through 12th grade, and we just launched in June lesson plans that are aligned to the North Carolina Standard Course of Study to make this as easy for teachers as possible, to expose kids to those durable skills as well as potential careers from the beginning. The purpose of 3rd grade is not to get ready for 4th grade. The purpose of 3rd grade is to eventually prepare students to be successful in the
Exactly.
plans of their choice.
Exactly. Senator Lee, you've heard a lot during this discussion, and one point you made struck home with me. I served on my local city council years ago, and at the time, while city council doesn't fund education, we paid attention to it, and our county commissioners, of course, funded. At that time, in that city, we'll leave it nameless, it had the highest per student funding in the state. But if you looked at the student achievement score, it was almost in the opposite direction. So I say that to say, you made the point about funding and policy. Funding clearly important for our education system throughout the continuum, but it's not the only answer. So from what you've heard today, from your leadership role in the legislature, what are the, obviously funding and policy support, but what are some other areas and other strategies that our General Assembly can implement to support our educational ecosystem?
Yeah, some of the things we're working on right now really revolve around, we talked about career academies, but we're talking about really kind of finding these ideas that we think will work, and before we scale them up, make sure that the data really shows that they're going to work. Spark NC is another example of what we're doing around our state, where we're kind of removing that concept of time as a proxy for learning and giving students the ability to really kind of work on certain things at their own pace, and also if they determine that that's not where the path they want to head down, they've got the opportunity to change paths. We talked about some of these policy issues. How we fund education is incredibly important. Getting away from the Carnegie unit and
Right.
finding another mechanism. The big thing that we need to really be thinking about, and all this has to come together, is this concept of one education system. The one thing that we don't have right now and that we haven't been working on is this concept of continuity with our education system. And structurally, we don't have that. We have an appointed state board, we have an elected superintendent, we have a legislature that funds education.
Right.
We have a local board of education on policy. We've got a local community college that does the funding. We've got to find a way to institutionally be able to work in North Carolina with a partner that kind of brings a lot of this forward and has this continuity, that can collect the data, do the research, that partners with the General Assembly and our Department of Public Construction and others. And that's a challenge I think we need to be working on, and hopefully we'll find solutions for that.
Others?
Can I
We
say-
have a captive audience, so let's
Yeah.
make
Yeah.
sure we
Yeah.
you Senator. So-
They can tell me what we need
Oh,
to do.
Exactly,
Exactly.
exactly.
I just wanted to say a quick word about funding,
Okay.
and Larry brought it up earlier. New York is spending $30,000 per student right now in per pupil funding,
Right.
and their test scores have not budged in 20 years prior to the pandemic. We don't have a funding problem; we have a matching resource to need problem.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about school funding specific to North Carolina, most people don't know this because the media is not ever going to say it, but the bottom quartile of schools by poverty get 33% more in funding than the top quartile of schools. And to translate that, Wake County per pupil expenditure is probably around $8,000 per year. Hyde County Public Schools expenditure per student is $19,000 a year. So I hear all the time that we don't have equitable funding in North Carolina. We actually do have very equitable. If we define equity as giving all students what they need when they need it, and the idea that a student who is special needs, it costs more to educate them than a student who doesn't.
Right.
The way that the Republican General Assembly funds schools with the allotment system is overly burdensome and complicated, but it is equitable. We give more money to students who need more money to get their education. And in fact, we give more money if you are low income, more money if you have a special learning need, and more money if you are an English language learner, to the tune of almost more than twice the funding in one county than another. So there's definitely a lot of work to be realized. I know also Senator Lee is very passionate, if I could speak for you, about solving the funding needs around students with special needs. There needs to be a different formula in the way that different services cost more, and we have pretty much a flat funding formula when it comes to serving students with special needs. So there's a lot of work that he is definitely championing in that space.
Well, and there's something to be said about the fact that what the superintendent just brought out is seen not just at the state level, but more focused here at the local level. So that what she just talked about doesn't just occur at the state level. Mecklenburg County does the same thing too. So when you're looking at schools that are tier 1, the absolute necessary, though these are the problems, schools where you have to have funding.
Right.
There's almost triple the amount of per pupil expenditures going into those systems than there are at schools that are performing very well. And the issue that we've seen is that, and again, I'm going to bring this point back up again, is matching resources to need. That's an excellent way to say that. Superintendent's absolutely right. We don't need another administrator telling teachers what to do. We actually need to fire that person and hire 3 more and put them in the schools. And those people need to reduce class size, and they need to spend more time with kids. We don't need to be paying administrators $225,000 to sit in a building and not be out in the system. I understand a regulatory burden, and I understand the needs that are brought forth by the DOE as well as by the folks here in our state. However, there should only be enough people there to meet that need and then stop. We don't need additional area superintendents, more area superintendents, more sub-superintendents, and then additional people on top of that. When you look at the charts and you see exactly where the growth in actual, when you look at the growth in enrollment, Mecklenburg County has seen enrollment drop, but we've actually seen more administrators hired. It's the same across the system.
It's actually true nationally. There's new data on this that shows that we have more adults working in public schools than ever before, and that the ratio of students to adults has actually expanded. And if we had taken that money and invested it in teacher pay, we wouldn't have a teacher pay
That's
level.
correct.
Right. Before we close today's discussion, I'd like to try a quick lightning round. And lightning means lightning. So quick answers, first thoughts, and really two categories. One I'll lump together and call it technology, AI, innovation, and all of this is under the umbrella of impact on education or the engagement of education. So the first bucket would be technology, AI, innovation, what impact and partnership with education. And the next, economic development, what role, and we've talked a little bit about that today. So Laura, I'll pick on you to go first. Lightning round, what comes to mind when in relation to education, whether it's with community college or if you want a broader lens, when you think about the impact of technology and AI and innovation in education?
So when I think about that, I don't think about that in one particular sector. We know that AI is going to be in healthcare, in teaching, in manufacturing, in agriculture. It's going to have a presence in everything that we do. So I think about education really incorporating AI into every single program. It's not in just computer technology, it's across the board. And I think that there is also an opportunity for us to do a whole lot more in helping everyone that teaches and work within our systems understand how that's going to impact their particular sector.
Okay.
Generative AI will enable us to engage in personalized learning in a way that we never envisioned. It'll enable us to scale it to each and every child. And it is at already a level that will enable us to do it essentially today to get started, and it will leapfrog every 12 months or less as we continue to move forward.
Sure.
We became the fourth state in the country in January to issue AI guidance for all of our public schools. However, that's not enough. Our schools of education and our educator prep programs are going to have to start infusing, as Laura so aptly said, into all aspects of preparing our pre-service teachers.
And the teachers need to be given every AI opportunity they can to help students learn, but students need to not necessarily be exposed to that until such time as they've been able to learn to read, learn to write, learn to be able to do mathematical issues at a level at which they're going to be able to understand what AI is. We cannot use AI as a crutch to allow individuals to not understand the basics of learning. That's my concern. And there was actually a really interesting article in The Economist about how that's happening in disadvantaged sectors of our area. So we have to be very careful with that.
Larry, why don't you start us off?
Yeah.
Let's go back, lightning back down the row. Economic development, what comes to mind?
I think our business community is woefully underdoing their ability to get engaged into our education system, and I would challenge them to find more ways to do so.
So through the North Carolina Chamber, we just issued guidance to do exactly that, to show businesses how they can start engaging with their pipeline, their future pipeline, while kids are still in high school. And I agree that they need to do that, and I hope that this tool will help.
And since this is an education panel, workforce training, adult learners, eliminating time as a proxy, for learning, being able to obtain credentials in a more streamlined fashion, maybe not necessarily always in a curriculum program, but really working on that Con Ed piece, and that comes from the legislature funding it and prioritizing it with Propel NC, or at least something very similar to that concept.
Thanks.
All of that, plus
Right.
North Carolina was #1 last year to do business. Why? Because of workforce. So
Exactly.
hats off to our community colleges, and I would just challenge our General Assembly and Senator Lee to continue to do the work they're doing and lifting up our education systems.
Outstanding discussion today. I learned a lot. That's why I always like engaging in these, learned a lot. And again, want to thank Opportunity North Carolina for providing this level of discussion with these outstanding leaders, and I'm sure we'll hear more in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
sir.
All right.